Okay, so that just is about, people know it is Certificate for Eligibility for Specialist Registration in Psychiatry. As you know, the GMC's sort of got two levels of registration. So you've got a full registration, that's why you're practicing, and you've got a license to practice. A lot of the folk, obviously, the CESR is a process for getting us to the specialist registration or the specialist register that GMC hold, which basically means that you can then practice, or you're eligible for substantive consultant posts in the UK wide. So we've introduced the sort of the speakers there. So moving on, second one, Nandini. So I think it has been an established route towards GMC specialist registration CESR, not just in psychiatry, but across all specialities. And just to give a little bit of the figures about the last 5 years, I think this is very ballpark. Liz might give more specific ones. It's about sort of 200 doctors applying, so 30, 40 doctors applying each year. And sort of 50% of those applications are then successful. And these are across all subspecialties. So people might know that we've got CESR and, you know, all the subspecialties of psychiatry, so child and adolescent, adult, old age, you know, psychotherapy, forensics, and learning disability. So, you know, these are people who've been, that sort of number who are successful, have been successful in obtaining specialist registration. Now, when you look at the numbers of doctors, a lot of times the doctors who are applying are working at an SAS level, and there's a large number of doctors. I think the last census showed us about 2,200 doctors SA working at that level. Compared to that, if you see that the number of applications of only about 10% who applied in the last 5 years. So, and we do think there is work to be done at an organizational level, at the college level, about some parts of the UK, or applications are quite few from some parts of the UK. And I think that's sort of led to some thinking about the priorities. But I think, so it is taken up by a proportion of SAS doctors. I think the college does recognize that we want everybody to work at the top of their license. So we do feel that people who got the knowledge, skills, experience should be able to put these portfolios together, the portfolio of evidence, and really, if they are interested, they should sort of apply and get to the specialist registration. People might choose to still continue working at an associate or a specialist grade level and so on. But I think that is a recognition if people are successful with their portfolios, to see that they are on the specialist register. So I think I took a post in September last year, and I think still learning there how all of this is sort of coming together in the college and where it sits. I think we have spent some time thinking about what might be the issues that are from the college's point of view, and the Equivalence Committee. So I chair what is called the Equivalence Committee. An Equivalence Committee is made up of all people who do evaluations for applications that come in through the GMC. And I take a final look along with Liz and sign them off. We do make recommendations whether people go on to the register or they have some gaps there, and we ask them to complete those gaps and come back to us ideally. So having chaired a couple of those meetings and sort of taken a view from the members, I think those are the issues that we do recognize that still there is, I think there's been a lot of work already done, but there's still a little bit more way to go in terms of the information that should be available around the process and the details of it, which is still not readily available to applicants. I think the support for interested applicants is still felt to be limited, and this can vary in different parts of the country, and depending on which trust people come from. They can be, you know, trusts where people have got a few different evaluators, you know, people who are on the Equivalence Committee or are quite switched on with the process and can support candidates in their trust, but other trusts might have, mental health trusts might have limited expertise sitting within those organizations. So I think the support at an organizational level, and then I think in terms of support from the college level, that we've sort of gone further in opening up CESR clinics, trying to make the process more transparent, trying to educate people around what makes a successful application. But I think that support could go further. We also have recognized that there is no dedicated sort of portfolio or an electronic folder that can be used to record evidence. I think it is quite a cumbersome process for people to uh, pull a lot of evidence, which runs into often between 800 to 1,000 pages in some, so it is a large piece of evidence that people are collecting, and there is actual clinical work to demonstrate. So I think it would have been very useful to have, and some of the other colleges have developed that. So I think we've got a subgroup now going, which is looking at this. And I think there's a natural opportunity when the curriculum is changing. There is a new portfolio developing for the trainees. So I think we want to sort of use that opportunity to have something for doctors who are making an application through this route. I think there is, as I said, this point has been said, in some ways that awareness and knowledge of what is required is quite limited among organizations. So your supervisors or mentors who are there in organizations might not be fully aware of what will make a good CESR application. So when doctors are getting that supervision at times, or menteeship, the mentors themselves might not be aware. So we are looking to sort of do something around that. We have seen that another development has been of more systematic programs coming up more and more to support CESR applicants, the one like fellowship schemes. So I think it does feel that the college has already, there is a guidance in the website, but maybe can do a bit more to sort of support organizations as well as have a role in sort of quality assurance, because you do start to hear rumblings as well about how things can go wrong in some of these schemes, or the applicants are not getting what they might have come in for those schemes. As people might know, the curriculum, the core training curriculum, the whole psychiatry curriculum is changing. And I think it is a good change. I think there's in that process, especially for CESR, I think the learning outcomes are going to be simplified, and instead of having all of those ILOs that used to be there before, I think more concise higher learning outcomes, HLOs, have given us opportunities to sort of be more clearer in the expectation from your applications. So I think that's another development, which is a lever for change. We do have some capacity issues on the evaluators, and people to be aware. I think there is about 70 odd evaluators overall registered, but during the pandemic and even after now, with the strain on services, all of these people are in sort of voluntary roles, and it does take 20-30 hours to sort of assess an application. So it's quite a demand on people's time. And I think the engagement, active engagement from people has gone down because of workforce pressures. So I think, again, that's another issue recognized, and the plan is to sort of expand on that. Next slide, Nandini. Thank you. So I think a few steps that are being taken to resolve the issues. I think the big one around this is sort of raising the profile within the college as well. So we get the buy-in from the college to support people who are taking this route. I think we do plan to have a yearly schedule which is more clearer about training events, so that people can join in from time to time. And we have recognized that people might need to come in more than once on these training events, which are for applicants. And when it says interested applicants, as we've got today, I think people do need to come on a few times, because once they start the application, queries might be different when you are thinking about an application, and then once you start it, and once you're halfway through it, you start to get different set of questions. So maybe some of these training events can help answer those. We've got, I think the plan is also to, I think we don't have that many online sort of videos available, which at least can improve awareness. I think we can't put everything probably on the videos which would be included in a training event, but I think if those videos at least can be used for improving awareness among the applicants, interested ones, or even the supervisors. So I think we need to make that available. I think we're looking at maybe some CPD menus which are more dedicated, especially around non-clinical HLOs coming in the future. So maybe work with our CPD lead in the college to see what might be the activities that we can direct the applicants towards completing, and that could be seen as achieving a part of the knowledge aspect of the non-clinical HLOs. I think, as I've said before, with the curriculum changing, there is an opportunity which arose to sort of start writing the specialty specific guides. So each adult curriculum, learning disability, old age, child, each the guide has been sort of rewritten and now I think has been submitted or about to be submitted to the GMC. They're quite happy. So there's been work done within the Equivalence Committee to help make the outcomes more clearer. So make the expectations of what is expected under each higher learning outcome much more clearer than what used to be in the previous ILOs. So I think that is a good piece of work which has gone in and hopefully should help applicants again to make it simpler to see what's the expectation and how to achieve that. I think, as I said, we put a subgroup together with the portfolio developers in the college to see what can we do in terms of having a dedicated e-portfolio for collecting and maintaining, and then maybe linking with the GMC pack to submit it. I think the last step might be difficult, but at least if you've got something as an offer from the college where people can use, like the trainees would use their portfolios, it might be a step further than where people are now. We've got a network event, I think on the 6th or 7th of October especially for people. It's mainly directed towards directors of medical education and medical directors from organizations, especially those who are offering CESR fellowship schemes to sort of come together. I think part of it is developing some good practice in these schemes around recruitment, maintenance of schemes, assessment at regular intervals, how people who are in these schemes really get the maximum out of them, and also maybe thinking about what might be aspects to assure quality, which as maybe it might be in the future, it might be like a peer review of schemes which might assure quality for them. So I think let's see what sort of comes out of that event. So there is some preparation that's going into it already. And then we've got, as I said, increasing the supervisor capacity through development of trainers. I think we did recognize that the current offer from the college mainly is around sort of training for evaluation of portfolios, which I think gives consultants who become involved in this a good experience of what CESR is and what an evaluation means, what is required for it. But I think there might be so many other people who are involved, and it might be just not medical colleagues, but psychologists, for example, and so on, who do CESR assessments for people who are going through that process, but might not have a level of awareness of the route as such. So I think there is probably a bit more to be done on the awareness part. And I think there is a third level of need that started to come through, which is around people who are administering the schemes or are really mentors who have got these schemes running in organizations. So they might be thinking about more than just what a good application needs, but how to manage such a scheme within the organization. So trying to address those different needs. And I think we are on way to sort of pushing our drive towards increasing the evaluator capacity, along with which we also, I think, need the college officer support. So CESR coordinator, which is currently Liz's, I think, part-time, or she'll tell you there's never enough time in her diary to sort of, it's been stretched in different directions. So I think we are putting up a case where we do want a lot of that CESR coordination time to be dedicated towards just this route rather than a split job or anything. I think there's also the plan to increase the capacity in the CESR clinics. Nandini will touch on it and Liz might expand on that. These are clinics that some of you might have already used as an opportunity to catch up with Liz from the college to know about the process, about particular your personal circumstances of what in your job will help you make a successful application, or how to get some evidence pulled together. So all of those questions, which I think the CESR clinics have been well utilized and have been booked for months in advance. And if you haven't done, I would recommend them, because there's quite a positive feedback around them. We're trying to increase, I think, with all of the plan, try and increase capacity of those clinics as well. So I think from this point onwards, I'll let Nandini take over, and then she'll goes into the actual application and the details. And I think we'll take the questions in the questions and answers. You can pop anything into the chat as well as we go along. Thank you. Nandini?
Thank you for that, Neeraj, taking over. I will take you more through the practical aspects of a CESR portfolio or application. We've been hearing a very useful overview of the journey of CESR and the vision for the future, which Neeraj will be leading on. But I'll concentrate on what kind of evidence does an assessor or evaluator look for? What exactly are you going to put in your portfolio? And some of you might already be building on your portfolio. And today, as we go through this presentation again, you might pick up further tips on how to fine-tune things. And if you're making a start right from scratch, I'm going to bust a few myths and tell you how your portfolio is going to be different from that of a trainee portfolio, because they do look very different. How do our evaluators match the CESR evidence within that portfolio against specialist curricula? Because the psychiatric curricula are still the standards we match against. That is still the same. That's the level of competence. That's the range of knowledge and skills we are looking at. We'll also talk about the common pitfalls. And by the end of the presentation, you'd probably know those common pitfalls yourself by the time I come to that slide. We are going to talk about the GMC and the college, where the ownership lies, where the process lies, the application process of application, review, appeal. So you do a first application with all the curricula demonstrated. Then if that application is not successful, you have 12 months to put in a review application, which is just the recommendations given for the competencies you have not passed. And at any stage, if you're unhappy with the outcome of an application or review, you can go for a written or an oral appeal. Now, the chances of success are always greatest at the review. So whilst our initial application process roughly throughout the years has had a first-time success rate of round about 30%, the review applications, the review process usually has around an 80% chance of success. So if you're not successful the first time, please don't lose hope. Most people are not successful. The point to be taken is, how many recommendations have you got to fulfill? Being told that you have not fulfilled 10 competencies and you have lots of recommendations to go through, versus you've not passed 1 or 2 competencies and you've just got a short list, means that you've done very well. So it's not a black and white pass or fail thing. It is about how many more competencies are you still going to have to demonstrate. And whilst I'm on this slide, I'm going to introduce our favorite topic in CESR, which is primary and secondary evidence. And if there's nothing else you take away from here, at least take away that message, the difference between primary and secondary evidence. And that is absolutely the backbone of a CESR application. So primary evidence is the evidence that speaks for itself and tells me about your competencies as a psychiatrist without anybody explicitly telling me whether you are functioning at consultant level or not. Examples are GP letters, tribunal reports, minutes of meetings where you've participated, where I can see whether you've chaired, whether you've taken up action points, whether you've given your opinions. So nobody in a GP letter is telling me whether you are functioning at consultant level or not, but I can read that GP letter and make up my mind as an evaluator whether it meets consultant standard in the UK. And that is the point of primary evidence. Secondary evidence, on the other hand, is not direct evidence of your work, but somebody else telling me about you. So that is references, testimonials, workplace-based assessments, a lot of things that a trainee portfolio depends on for an ARCP outcome. And that is the crucial difference between an ARCP process and a CESR process. If your consultant, supervisor, mentor knows exactly what you need for a CESR portfolio, it's not lots and lots of workplace-based assessments. It's actually opportunities to work clinically across a spread of situations, a spread of diagnostic, age-wise, clinical settings, everything that shows the spread in your specialty, and present those evidences that evidence in a way which is quality, gold standard. So rather than have time for a case-based discussion, it is about time to write a really good gold standard GP letter, a really gold standard tribunal report, to put that extra effort in the detail over there. And whilst we go through this presentation, I'll give you lots of other examples of primary evidence. The analogy I give between ARCP and CESR is that it's like having two groups of students with exactly the same syllabus, and that is your specialty curricula. The specialty curricula gives you the standard, the knowledge, the skills that we are expecting you to demonstrate. But whilst in one group, we are asking them to demonstrate it through a process similar to short answer questions or MCQs done every year of the process. In the CESR process, we are asking them to write essay type questions at the end of a 3-year process. But the levels they are demonstrating are exactly the same, only the exam papers and the answers look different. And as you would know, when you prepare for exams, depending on the type of exam you're sitting, whether it's an MCQ or an essay type, your preparation has to be different, even though your knowledge base is the same. And that's the difference between CESR and CCT rotations. So that's the essence of a CESR application. You need to provide documentary evidence of having achieved specialist competencies outlined in the UK psychiatric curricula, and you're presenting this to people who have no direct knowledge or any direct sight of you seeing a patient, talking to a patient. Your paper evidence has got to speak for itself. I want to see that letter which says, for example, not just I saw a patient on this date, but I did a home visit for this patient on this date on the request of my CPN colleague who has received urgent text messages from the family relaying concerns that the patient's mental health is deteriorating. Immediately, I've got the picture of a doctor who is responsive to emergencies, who's approachable by team members, who knows how to prioritize their work, and is rushing out with the CPN colleague to see a patient who really needs it. There's lots and lots of the corridor conversations, the chats we have that we don't document enough in our letters because, okay, we don't always have the time to write the detail that we could and we should. But at least for CESR, if you're picking up a really complex case, a complex clinical situation that you would like to put in your portfolio, at least try and put the detail over there. Other than the specialist curricula, and you're going to apply one at a time, there are no dual applications. If you're going to apply for old age and general adult at the same time, you put 2 different applications for it. But other than the higher curricula, if you don't have an MRC Psych, you need to give competencies of the core curricula as well. Now, whilst that sounds daunting, it sounds like you've got to give double. You've got to give the higher curriculum and the core curriculum. What it actually boils down to is a couple of cases, 2 or 3 cases of the specialties you are not applying 2. Example. So you are applying for general adult and you don't have an MRC psych. You've got to give 2 or 3 cases of old age and 2 or 3 cases of one of the neurodevelopmental specialties or a combination, intellectual disability and CAMS. So you've got to show the spread, because the core curriculum demands it, of general adult, old age, and neurodevelopmental specialty. If you're applying for one of them, you've got to give a few cases worked up at core level, and they don't have to cover the entire specialty for those specialties that you're not applying in. But that's what it boils down to. The reason being that when you look at the non-clinical competencies, research, leadership, communication, record keeping, if you have done the higher curricula on those counts, you would have covered the core curriculum. You can't have achieved teaching, leadership, research, and the higher curriculum and not have covered the core curriculum at the same time. The gaps come in the clinical competencies, and they come in the specialties that you're not covering because you are concentrating on the higher curriculum. If you have MRC Psych, just concentrate on the higher curriculum you are applying against, and that's that. The evidence has to be within 5 to 6 years. So most of it has to be 5. By a stretch, GMC will get within 6 years, but anything older than that is considered out of date. Now, I'll explain a few more things here. First of all, 5 to 6 years is chronological 5 to 6 years. It's not full-time equivalent, unfortunately. So it's just 5 to 6 chronological years. There's a difference between your eligibility evidence and the evidence you give for your competencies. So your MRC Psych does not have an expiry date. If you have done any training that makes you eligible to apply for CESR, that does not have an expiry date. That could have been done years ago. But the evidence you're giving for having attained your competencies, that has to be within the last 5 to 6 chronological years. And that coming to the eligibility criteria. So in order to be eligible to apply for CESR in the first place, you need to have had at least 6 months of continuous training in that specialty undertaken anywhere in the world, because CESR is an international process. We don't demand that 6 months of training should have come from the UK. They could have been anywhere in the world, or a specialist medical qualification in psychiatry obtained anywhere in the world. If you have MRC Psych, you can apply for any of the CCT specialties. And again, this is exactly what I was trying to explain, that this training or the specialist qualification, it could have been done at any point in your career. That does not have an expiry date. We have a very, very small proportion of doctors who are not eligible to apply for CESR because they have directly gone into service posts after their foundation years or equivalent, and they don't have a specialist qualification in psychiatry, but that is a very, very small minority of doctors. Now, after talking about the eligibility, let's talk about, what do the GMC specialist applications team do? So we've got 2 teams over here. We've got the specialist applications team in GMC, and we've got the Equivalence Committee in the college. And these are the 2 teams who speak to each other in the CESR process. The specialist applications team is actually the one-stop shop to specialist registration. So this is the team which takes CESR recommendations, it takes CCT recommendations as well, and CEGPR. They provide verification for the evidence being provided. So once it comes to the college, all the background work of verification, and this is authentic and not generated evidence that has been done, and they own CESR. So legally, you are applying to GMC, to the specialist applications team. The decision which comes from the specialist applications team. The Royal Colleges are advisors. So if you're not happy with the decision, you appeal against the GMC. You don't appeal against the college, though the college might be called as an expert witness. And this is the RCPsych Equivalence Committee. So the Equivalence Committee, as Neeraj has already said, is a group of consultants from across the country. They are usually all senior trainers, people like Priti, who are TPDs, and I was a TPD in my time as a CESR evaluator as well. We have DMEs, clinical directors, people from different levels. The minimum requirement is that people must have been a consultant post-specialist registration for at least a year. And they attend the committee meetings twice a year. They come to various refresher trainings, and we keep in touch through various CESR applications, because a CESR application goes to 2 different evaluators who do their evaluation independently before conferring with each other about where disagreements have happened, and hence then trying to come to a consensus. So the 2 evaluators, after they've discussed the areas of variance and they either come to a consensus, or the Associate Dean for Equivalence takes a final decision. And finally, our CESR and Training Coordinator, Liz Boxall at the moment, who is sadly going to leave us very soon, have to mention that, compiles everything together, right from the variance report to the discussion and the final template, which is ultimately signed off by Associate Dean for Equivalence and goes back to GMC. So this is what the process looks like in a figure. So when you start doing your application, which is online nowadays, and you can start the application a year in advance. You don't have to pay money to start an application process. The money is taken around the time when you're pressing the submit button. And this process can act as a de facto portfolio, but it only has a 1-year duration. That's the point. So once you press that submit button, the GMC has a quick look in the first 2 days to make sure that you are eligible for applying. The very basic criteria is your CV, rightly written up in detail, and then 14 days for to get any basic evidence that might be missing. And then your GMC advisor, a certification officer, will take 30 days to go through your portfolio and issue a checklist for things that they find missing. Now, the certification officers are not medically trained, but they are people very experienced like Liz, who have a fair idea of picking up big gaps. For example, when I did my CESR, my certification officer picked up that I didn't have many cases of depression, that my portfolio was psychosis heavy. She wanted me to put in a bit more on research. I can't remember everything now, but she was very good at picking out those gaps. And they're not trying to make life difficult for you. When you submit to GMC, you don't rest over here. Application button, submit pressed is not the time to go on holiday. This is when the second leg of your journey begins. Speak with your certification officer, listen to the advice that they give you. When they issue a checklist, you have 60 days to give in that extra evidence. And actually, if your portfolio, is missing a few pieces of evidence that you can collect in a few days, it's still okay to submit, to start the process, because until the application comes to the college, it's pretty much open. It is when the application has got in as much evidence as you can give, you've discussed with the certification officer that this is it, that it comes to the college, and this is where you can now rest and go on holiday and just wait for your decision. And it's within 49 days that the college does the 2 evaluator evaluation, the variance report, the coming to the consensus, finally signed off by the Associate Dean for Equivalence. And then GMC does a quality check for up to 41 days before a final decision is issued. So by the time you give to GMC and you get the decision, this is what is called the 3 months legal deadline. So, but that has not been really the case in COVID times for backlogs in various places. But let us hope that by the time this group is applying, we would be back to giving people a decision within 3 months. But what I want to reiterate over here is work with your certification officer. That's really, really important. So coming back to primary evidence and highlighting a few more points there. So when you are demonstrating your clinical skills, history taking, management, diagnosis, formulation, risk assessment, all that is dependent on clinic letters, tribunal reports, medical legal reports, etc. Part of it can be from CPA meetings. Minutes of CPA meetings could be attached to show, especially if you've been chairing it, if you've been leading on it, it still shows us your clinical thinking. When you give us meetings, minutes of meetings, don't just give us meetings you have attended or shadowed. That's not enough. Give us the meetings you've chaired. Give us the meetings where you've taken a proactive role. Give us a meeting where we can envisage you actually in the room interacting with your colleagues. The really good portfolios which get through, I tell you, I'm surprised at the end of going through that evaluation. By the end, I think I can almost see the doctor in my mind's eye. I can actually see them, how they talk to a patient, how they take histories, how they interact with colleagues. Psychotherapy summaries, really important. We need the primary evidence. Just your supervisor reports are not primary evidence. That's still secondary evidence. Now, you can give your summaries in the form of essays. You can give your summaries in the form of a beginning of therapy letter written to the patient or GP, an end of therapy letter given to the patient or GP, which gives us an overview of what's happened in the middle. You can give us a thick booklet of your entire year of psychodynamic work, and we can at least skim through it and see that the work has taken place. The reason why we ask of this is you've got to understand our position that we take international applications. We can't have one rule for the UK and one rule for overseas candidates unless we see some primary evidence of what was happening in that room. Just a supervisor's report can be very thin on the ground as evidence for psychotherapy. Now, in terms of what kind of psychotherapy you submit, we want 2 models. So we are not strictly saying one long case, one short case, one psychodynamic, one CBT. You can be creative about it. Sometimes we've had people inquiring with certain models of psychotherapy I've never even heard about, to be honest, but I've had fun Googling them and seeing, that sounds really interesting. And people have gone out to actually get trained in a model that they are going to use in their day-to-day work. So that's really good. So if you do something like, let's say, a therapeutic community in personality disorder services and EMDR, that's a good enough combination. One tip, again, we give over there is do one individual and one group therapy. It just cuts down the possibilities of, if you have 2 individual cases of one person DNAing and then you losing all the work that you've done in the middle. Then about teaching, and I will mention over here that teaching is more difficult than people realize to evidence. Research, on the other hand, is much easier than what people think. So for teaching, if you read the curricula, whether it's the old one or the new format, you will find that it's not just about delivering teaching. That's at core level. At higher level, we want to see you teaching in different models. We want to see you teaching to different groups. We want to see you identifying teaching needs within certain groups and modifying the way you deliver teaching depending on the group and the topic you are teaching. Right. So let's say if you put in an email to your team manager to say, I want to do some teaching for my colleagues on metabolic monitoring, or maybe supervised community treatment orders, anything at all, because I have picked up this need. And your manager writes back to say, that sounds like a really good idea. And then you have the email trail of how you organize this training. You have a reflection on what you've decided to do, whether you're going to do teaching slides and a lecture, whether you're going to do it as an open group discussion, whether you're going to do a combination of slides and case vignettes, whether you're going to do just workshop material with case vignettes or questions given to the various groups, and then feedback from the participants, and then an overall reflection about how it went. If you want to add an assessment of teaching at the end, you could, but after all this triangulated evidence, that's really superfluous. And triangulated evidence is the other concept that I'm going to introduce here. So triangulated evidence is about really cleverly putting pieces of evidence together which show a journey, and together they say a bigger story than just on their own. You can have triangulated clinical evidence. So you've done a first assessment for a patient, you have the GP letter, you might have made referrals for second opinions or to look at other differential diagnosis to other colleagues. Then the patient gets admitted, you might have chaired a ward round, maybe you did a tribunal report, and then you reviewed the patient when the patient was discharged. And I'm not saying that you do this for every clinical case, but 2 or 3 examples of triangulated evidence is really useful in showing us your continuity. And similarly for teaching, what I have just described from that email trail right up to feedback and reflection is triangulation. And so use triangulation cleverly throughout your portfolio. Secondary evidence still has its place. So, structured references, testimonials, workplace-based assessments. But what I mean to say over here is, things like appraisal records, you're going to have them if you're working in the UK. You will have to put in at least 4 structured references. But don't run around asking people for testimonials. Don't run around asking people for workplace-based assessments. Your time is better spent on seeing another complex patient and spending more time on writing a really good letter or report, medical legal report or a tribunal report, rather than asking for another case-based discussion. And so by this time, the primary evidence is absolutely the key for clinical work. Secondary evidence, yes, we do have competencies like leadership, team working, time management. Get an up-to-date 360-degree appraisal before you submit your portfolio. And that can tick off a lot of these non-clinical ILOs or HLOs, as we are going to call them from now on, higher learning outcomes, competencies. Though I will tell you that our evaluators are also creative. I used to look for, let's say, if I'm looking at the date of a clinic letter, and sometimes you leave the dictation date up there, and does this doctor dictate their letters on time? Or when you put in your tribunal reports, do you put them well in advance, well in time, as the deadline would want? When you answer your emails, are you really good at answering priority emails like this? And that's the kind of thing that you've got to pick up as well. Emails are extremely useful, again, if you use them well. Things like, when an email comes out to say there's a sudden gap in the teaching program, or there's a sudden gap in the on-call rota, can anybody help? And if you answer that straight away to say, yep, I'm here, I'm going to help, and the coordinator writes back to say, you're an absolute star, doctor. Those are the kinds of emails that you've got to save for your CESR portfolio. It shows your communication, your teamwork, your ability to step up in leadership roles and putting yourself forward. So this is how to structure your evidence. Now, this is, let's say if you have a big folder, which you put on as, at the moment, it'll be a DIY portfolio to say, this is my CESR evidence. These bullet points are these, I'm trying to get the arrow here. Yeah, so these points are actually your subfolders within the same, big folder. So if for HLO 1, higher learning outcome 1, you have one subfolder for testimonials, thank you cards, 360-degree appraisal, annual appraisals, etc. You evidence HLO 2, 3, 4 in case histories, GP letters, psychotherapy evidence, keep a separate bullet point for that. You keep another subfolder for correspondence with colleagues, leadership, management, CPD. You have another one for clinical governance, complaint management, safeguarding meetings, teaching, supervision, CPD certificates. Please don't give us every half an hour online training you've done on things like hand washing, infection control, fire control, which, as important as they are and part of your professional requirements, that's not part of your psychiatry CESR competencies. So whilst we would be okay with a certificate which shows, or at least a mention in your appraisal that you keep up with your mandatory training and you keep up with the CPD requirements as per the requirements of good standing in the college, just pick out the key CPD events you have attended and contributed to over the years, not just each and every piece of paper. That increases the fluff, and your evaluators are human. They will miss important information if you give them lots and lots of unimportant ones. And now, talking about the new curricula, the new specialty specific guidance, very shortly, because I'm mindful of time over here. So the old curricula structured competencies into 19 ILOs, or intended learning outcomes. There was a lot of overlap and repetition over there, and the CAMS curriculum looked completely different to the others. So if you looked at the competency and the sub-competencies, we were running into hundreds of bullet points and hundreds of pages. The new curricula has not put in stuff or standards which is absolutely new, but it has structured the requirements into 9 neat higher learning outcomes. And this has been mapped against the general professional competencies of GMC. What has happened is GMC put out these general professional competencies and asked all the Royal Colleges, not just psychiatry, to structure all their curricula to have one higher learning outcome against each of these GPCs. And that's how every HLO is kind of similar. For example, HLO 2 is the clinical competencies across the board for all Royal Colleges. But the content of HLO 2 is obviously different for general adult psychiatry versus old age psychiatry versus CAMS versus pediatrics, but it is still the cream clinical competency. Now, coming to the common pitfalls, as I've already mentioned, there's sometimes a lot of time spent on secondary evidence, lack of primary evidence of psychotherapy, or just one modality. People put in 2 cases of CBT. That's not going to give you credit. Not understanding the curriculum in its essence, trying to have that tick box advice, trying to have that tick box approach of how many cases, how many of this, how many of that. It's actually the quality that we are looking for, and you can be creative of how to demonstrate a competency that has been described. And some of the suggestions there are just suggestions. You can find your own ways to demonstrate your leadership, your clinical governance. They don't always have to be courses that you reflect on. We sometimes have limited clinical range of evidence. So if a doctor is working only in perinatal, only in liaison, only in rehab, giving us evidence only from that area, which doesn't cover the entire curriculum that they are applying for, evidence being more than 5 years old, advice from non-psychiatry medics in CESR. The reason I say this is there can be other curricula, other specialties, because of the nature, which do depend on secondary evidence, which do depend on workplace-based assessments. And sometimes people go to generic CESR trainings and they get confused because they're being told, no, you need to do lots of workplace-based assessments. You need to get lots of testimonials. And that might apply for surgery, but it doesn't apply for psychiatry. So some pointers at the end, being creative about your evidence. I've given some tips over there. Every email from a colleague matters. Turning hallway discussions into emails. You've given your CPN colleague some advice because they came into your office. Asking them, is it okay if I put our discussion into an email? And you just ping back saying, yeah, that's what we discussed. Or if you have discussed something with your consultant supervisor and they've said, that's brilliant, I don't see anything to change over there, then, saying, can I email that to you just to put it in writing, what we've agreed. And it also shows, again, your communication, working within your remit, but the fact you can still take senior decisions which are agreed by your consultant supervisor. Reflective practice can draw together a lot of things in every domain. They almost serve the purpose of a covering letter without appearing as a covering letter. And always right there at the center, primary evidence, and primary evidence. However sparkling your testimonials, however sparkling your references, if your clinical work, if your primary evidence does not speak for itself, you're not going to get through. But the opposite is correct. We sometimes have bland references. Sometimes, for want of better words, we have funny references. But if the primary evidence is spot on and sparkling, if we see you're a good doctor, you're a dedicated psychiatrist who takes pride in your clinical work, that is exactly what we are looking for. Some additional tips over here, trying to get a mentor who is an evaluator, or encouraging your supervisor who wants to support you to become an evaluator, as Neeraj has mentioned. As you might be getting over here, if this is the first time any of you are hearing about CESR, some of it might come across as very surprising to you that, oh, I didn't think about the CESR portfolio that way. And to stop a CESR portfolio looking like a mirror image of a trainee portfolio, which is what we don't want. Beginning and ending with the up-to-date curriculum. So read your curriculum. Your curriculum is your starting and ending point. And we've already talked briefly about this, so I'm going to skip this slide. And these are some further college resources. This is the guidance for rotational schemes. And if an organization is trying to set up a scheme, it tells them how. Priti is going to talk a bit more about it. Or if you are in such a scheme, then to see whether you are getting what the college recommends. So it's a PDF document, freely downloadable. Please have a look at it. And then you have the CESR clinic run by Liz at the moment, where you get the initial face-to-face discussion about your personalized circumstances. This is what you have. Does this apply to you? What are your options? What more do you need to do? There are GMC resources which talk about, who can be your referee, who can be your verifier, which route is most, applicable, which route is the best option for you. So a lot of the GMC pointers over here are really useful. Have a look at these links and, get your head around what the GMC is looking for. And that's the end of my formal presentation. I'll stop sharing and it's over to Priti, I think now.
Thank you very much, Nandini. I'll see if I can share my screen. Oh, something's happening here.
It's sharing, Priti, but not showing anything. Oh, it's come up now.
Coming now.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Neeraj and Nandini. I've heard and listened to lots of talks by both of you, and very aware of the CESR process in my journey. But it's always such a pleasure to listen, and I think I always pick up new things and new topics that I haven't been very aware of. So that was wonderful. Thank you. For some of the folk who may have joined a little bit late, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Priti Singh. I am a consultant psychiatrist in general adult psychiatry in NHS Grampian, and I'm also the clinical director of Family Mental Health Services. Prior to that, I've been a TPD for general adult psychiatry for North of Scotland, and I might know some of you who are here today. And only recently, over the last maybe year and a half, I've been involved with the CESR program and been a very proud member of the CESR Equivalence Committee and a CESR Evaluator as well. So I hope today I am able to bring a little bit of more Scottish-based information and supports, which hopefully be of value to everyone. The first part of my talk is going to be about things that I've learned and picked up over the last many months from listening to colleagues and trying to set things up right from the scratch for CESR support for our CESR aspirant doctors within our local board, and then hopefully talk a little bit about the journey from there to where we are just now with starting our first CESR fellowship in Scotland. So hopefully that's of value to everyone. I do think when I got involved with the CESR process, and again, for full disclosure, I'm not a CESR doctor myself. I came through the standard sort of CCT route. But in trying to understand the CESR process and knowing a little bit more about that, I think I've gone from the general sort of lay understanding of what most doctors have of CESR to hopefully, having a bit more along in my journey. And I think it would be fair to say that unless somebody is completely interested in that process or are aware of folk who have gone through the process, unfortunately in Scotland, a lot of people don't really understand what CESR is all about. And most of the anecdotal sort of information or talk, if you like, about CESR is very much that this is a very sort of convoluted process that can be very difficult, very arduous for people to achieve. And sometimes I think for doctors who are aiming to get into CESR and aiming to see this as a part of their career progression, that can be the the kind of thing that you meet, I think, when you start to talk to people about wanting to apply for a CESR. That is hopefully changing, and again, there are lots of organizational support and encouragement that we get from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, from our local boards, as well as from the Scottish Deanery. But certainly I wanted to mention that as a starting point, because I feel some of you might relate to that feeling here in Scotland. The current workforce, and this is completely from my own understanding of how things sit across the board in Scotland, is that majority of the CESR directed path, if you like, is very self-directed. So it's doctors themselves thinking that that might be something they want to do, and then that starts their journey of maybe finding out more information online, talking to relevant people and understanding what that process is, and then kind of either taking that forward or feeling unfortunately discouraged by just that long journey ahead of them. A variety of doctors are interested in CESR. Majority of them are our staff grade and associate specialist doctors. We've got 617 SAS doctors working within mental health across NHS Scotland, and several of the doctors are interested in considering CESR as a pathway towards achieving specialist registration, and then hoping to work as consultants subsequent to that. We do also have several locum consultants, both in NHS locum capacity as well as agency locum doctors, who are also very keen to develop their portfolios and hopefully apply for CESR going forward. And a few number of higher trainees who are actually in a, they're in a CCT-based program, but maybe they want to develop their skills in certain other aspects of psychiatry, which is not part of their CCT. So for example, we've got a doctor just now who's currently doing a CCT in general adult psychiatry, but is keen to do psychotherapy as well, and is thinking of psychotherapy as something that could be done, separate to the CCT. So there are certain high trainees doctors are keen on doing that as well. That's the majority of the workforce that we've got at the moment in Scotland, in my understanding. And obviously the fourth dimension is going to be the international doctors who are primarily coming into Scotland with the intention of getting into a CESR fellowship program to gain the competencies that they need for CESR and then applying for that subsequently. There's a lot of support that's available. Again, unfortunately, it's not very well structured and arranged in one specific place, but we're trying to do that in Scotland. But there are several organizations that are supporting doctors across the board, both nationally as well as UK-based organizations, right to start from your employers. So that would be your integrated joint boards, or your your employing NHS boards, which in Scotland are integrated along with the Health and Social Care Partnership. We've got the Scottish Deanery, so that is a separate board for us in Scotland, where they look after the training needs. So majority of the mainstream training for the CCT comes via the support systems of Scottish Deanery, and Scottish Deanery is actually also having support systems available for substantive SAS doctors who are quite keen to do the CESR. So they've been kind of engaging with that really well as well. We obviously got the Royal College and all the fantastic efforts by absolute stalwarts like Nandini and Neeraj, who are taking that forward and trying to disseminate and support services across UK to develop CESR as not as this obscure pathway that people take, but something that sits very proudly quite next to the CCT pathway, as something that's very viable, very doable, and it's slightly just different to the way CCT is achieved, but it's something that is also part of the mainstream way of looking at achieving specialist registration. And then finally, we've got support from GMC, which obviously regulates all of these activities as well. There are lots of barriers, I think, that come in the way. And again, I'm speaking very much from my own experience of speaking to doctors when I started off my journey of looking at CESR and trying to help develop that support network, if you like, for doctors who are quite keen to do the CESR pathway, but again, we're very much doing this on a self-directed manner without actually having very much organized or structured support around them. I think the first one is definitely not feeling ready yet, and I see that a lot with our doctors, where it's absolutely been an aspiration for them, maybe for a couple of months or sometimes even for a couple of years, as something that they absolutely want to do, but just don't feel quite ready yet, either because of their personal circumstances or work. Certainly, I think with the work pressures with COVID as well, sometimes your own aspirations and what you want to do in your own career almost takes the last seat, and you're more available for the service pressure needs sometimes. So that definitely feels like the top barrier, I think, for a lot of doctors who are just kind of thinking about that, but not yet applied in that journey. And as Nandini said, you could start immediately and actually start, open an application with GMC, and you've got a fair bit of time before you're finally committing to sending that off, or paying for that so that is formally evaluated. So actually, that is something I think that is a misconception more than something that is a reality. There are lots of misconceptions about the process. I hear lots of colleagues who would say things like, they might want to do their membership exam first and then apply for CESR, or they may feel that they don't have the right skills around them. Maybe they haven't been involved with certain aspects of the curricula for quite some time and don't feel quite comfortable with it. Most commonly things like research or competencies in those research domains, sometimes the developmental skill competencies. So things that may need them to go out with their regular day-to-day work, I think that becomes much more sort of difficult to achieve. And again, as I said, because there are not that many role models, unfortunately, in Scotland that you can turn to and actually see this is viable, this is very doable, if they can do it, I can do it. Unfortunately, we don't have that much available, or if we do, it's not something that is very clearly advocated to the doctors or in that journey. And I think that's what creates that misconceptions, where they're hearing from people who don't really understand what CESR is about, and maybe feel discouraged by the process of how that might work for them. People think that it's too difficult, it's too time consuming. There's a massive portfolio you need to collect over a long period of time. But in reality, actually, once you've embarked on that process and you've got a structured plan in place, it is something that kind of flows and very, very doable, I think, for people. there is definitely some concern, I think, that I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues about not there being any protected time for them to do their CESR. Certainly with the COVID, I know there's been a lot of pressure on the substantive staff across Scotland, and that's included substantive consultants, maybe who would be able to provide that support or supervision to doctors, as well as the SAS doctors, who I think in a lot of situations have actually maybe acted up to be locum consultants or done, taking up more active roles, which in some ways is fantastic because that gives them such wonderful experience to be able to take that to CESR. But it's about kind of protecting that time to the things that they absolutely need for themselves. So things like planning, organizing, making sure that they're keeping up to pace with whatever they have decided their journey is going to be for CESR, how long they need before they submit their application. So sometimes that has become a bit of a challenge for people as well. Again, some people would perceive that having opportunities to upskill in areas that are removed from daily practice, so things like psychotherapy or psychotherapeutic experience, or research, so some topics that might be removed from the day-to-day practice. Again, sometimes they might feel that it is difficult to get that experience. I must say in most areas within Scotland, that is something that is doable and is available, because it is still very much a part of the structure that is provided from Scottish Deanery. But there will be certain areas where there genuinely is difficulty in getting that experience. So for example, some of our more remote areas like our islands like Orkney and Shetland have sometimes struggled to have more support for doctors who might want to develop these skills. And then it's the organizational support. It very much feels like it's very patchy support, and it's almost, again, like I said earlier, very self-directed. You almost need to be very passionate about it, very self-directed, and be very driven and persistent with that to be able to proactively go out and get that information and get the right role models and support for you. And it doesn't feel like all that organizational support comes together in a linked way that it can be supportive for doctors. Service provision pressures, like I mentioned, and again, I hear that a lot with colleagues where work has just kind of taken over, and almost their plans for CESR kind of take a back seat sometimes. So those are genuine practical barriers, and I think it's important to recognize that they exist. But what's important is that you find a way of how you overcome those barriers. And the first thing I think for folk who are keen to look at the CESR journey is to first of all get that clarity of purpose. Why do you want to do the CESR? What is it exactly that's motivating you to do that? And is that absolutely something that you want to do? Because if you're going to be thinking about it in a half-hearted way, it's almost never going to take off, or you're not going to put the energy and the investment that needs for you to be able to take it through right to the end. So getting that clarity of purpose is really important, and a starting point, I think. The second thing is the clarity of process, and hopefully what Neeraj and Nandini said about what that process entails and how that works, helps you understand what exactly you need to do, what kind of evidence you need to get, what are the steps you need to follow to get through to that last stage. Commitment is, again, absolutely crucial as well, because if you're not going to be completely committed to that or give it the time that it needs, it's almost going to be something that's going to be sitting there uncompleted, and you're never going to find the time to prioritize what needs to be done for the CESR process. Once you've done all of those three things, I think then in some ways that's kind of simpler, because then it's just what you're planning and what you're acting. So you make a plan and you basically take that through action and find the right supports around you for you to be able to do that. So once you've done that, actually you can go to that next step of looking at a strategic planning, which is very specific to your own needs and what you've done in your own career and what you want to achieve for your CESR going forward. And then it's really important to build that action and keep that momentum, I think, with that action as well. Very often I see doctors will start off, very well-meaning, and they will feel very passionate about something. But as time goes on, because there isn't really that external structure that maybe other, trainees enjoy with the regular CCT pathway, where there's actually a structure that guides you through, it's sometimes very difficult to keep up that momentum with things. And then sometimes when you lose that momentum, you almost kind of lose track with things, and you've left it, for maybe months and months, and then it's difficult to pick that up again. So it's really important, I think, to have all of these things and then keep a momentum with things to make sure that they're going as planned. And then lastly, I think it's important to not necessarily do it all your own, because there's so many supports that are available, within your organization, within Scotland, as well as within the UK, that you can actually derive support from those, areas and actually build your network so that it's able to support you, and at the same time, sort of, build that peer group or peer community where there can be definitely that give and take of a lot of information and tips sharing, which is beneficial to everybody going forward. And that also kind of keeps up your passion and your momentum through with things. And in the end, I think it's really important that you review your progress. Again, sometimes people are stuck in that, I'm collecting evidence, as I'm going along, I'm collecting evidence, but you're not actually reviewing how well are you doing, how far are you, are you on track? Are you on track to get to that date, whatever you've decided that will be the date for you to submit your application. So having those weekly reviews, monthly reviews, or quarterly reviews is really important to keep tab of what evidence you're getting, because sometimes what tends to happen, and I've seen that with the applications that come in, is that the evidence is very lopsided. There may be too much evidence for certain sort of competencies that you've already achieved, and there's too much evidence, and then there's some aspects of the curricula that are not covered at all, or are covered so barely that the information is not enough for you to pass that that specific domain. So it's really important, I think, to review the progress as objectively as possible, not just to somebody who is submitting that evidence, but I think to also keep into mind what the evaluators will be looking for, having a little bit of that externality, if that's possible, by yourself, or taking support from someone who understands the process, or from peers or mentors, to actually see whether are you on track, which are the areas that are looking a little bit scant, and maybe you need a bit more information on those areas. So when to start? And I think the answer for that is now. It's never good to think that's something that you're going to do in the future. If you're thinking about it, it's the time now to start. And by start doesn't mean that you start to collect information or gather evidence immediately, but now means that now is the time when you start to actually think quite clearly, with clarity. Is this what you want to do? How are you going to do it? What's the structure that you're going to take? What kind of supports are available? What kind of links are you going to make? And then start that journey. And then, every journey starts with one step, and before you will be there towards the end. So how to start? The first thing I think is to structure your personal development plan. So that is something that's very specific to your CESR. Really what you're looking to do is to see what is it exactly that you need to do, and how are you going to do that. Then you need to kind of take that to maybe your line manager, your clinical director, your trainee program director. And again, in Scotland, the TPDs can provide support to you as a part of their role for the Scottish Deanery. So you can go to them to get the support, and the TPDs will be very aware of the curricula, even if they're not necessarily always aware of what CESR candidates need. They might definitely know about the curricula, and they might be able to support you. And quite crucially, and this is something that we're trying to develop locally as much as possible, is to join a local CESR peer group. If there isn't one in your board, then maybe you can create one. It doesn't really need a lot. All you need is a few people who are interested in that process, and you need to start somewhere where you can get together, and even at the first stage, just start to have those, that baseline meeting where even people are able to kind of share their understanding, share tips. Maybe folk have gone to some presentations or some conferences, they've got some information, people can bring that back and share that information. And that's, I think, a very good starting point, and definitely a point where we started in NHS Grampian at the start of our journey. So a little bit about how do you structure your PDP for CESR. I think the first thing, and Nandini kind of touched quite strongly on that, is that everything is key linked to the curricula. So really a good understanding of curricula is where you absolutely need to start and finish. What I would do is to basically, if I was a candidate, what I would do is basically look at what the curricula is for whichever specialty I'm applying to, and then look at my current job plan and maybe my job plans of how they've been over the last maybe couple of years, if I'm looking to use that evidence, and then try and match that from the curricula, even before I start to collect evidence, to see that, okay, in my current job, what kind of opportunities that I have to do things that will help me match to my curricula. So for example, I do communication letters to GPs, I do tribunals, I do communication, emails, maybe I already chair a couple of meetings, I've done some audits or some research or some QI work, so what kind of things can I already match that I've done? And one place where you could start is your annual, your appraisal. So in Scotland, we're all would be submitting annual appraisals. We're all subject to revalidation, and there will be information that we're collecting already through that SOAR process that we have in Scotland. And you might actually want to look at that if you want to look back, for the last couple of years to actually see what kind of things have you actually said that you've done, or look at your PDPs for your appraisal, and then try and at least start to match a little bit of the evidence to the curricula, so that you know what kind of things you can, sort of get evidence for. Once you've identified those areas where you can demonstrate those evidence, and that could be your key, if you like, for going forward to collect those evidence, and then make sure that the quality of that evidence is acceptable and is of good quality to be able to demonstrate your skills to the evaluators. What that process will also do is identify gaps in your experience. So for example, you are a community psychiatrist, you don't have experience of working in patients, or you don't have experience of on calls because that's not part of your job plan. You will be able to clearly identify the things that you have no experience for, or maybe that experience is so old dated that you can't use it. And then when you've identified those gap experiences, that might be something that you might need to discuss with your line manager or with your TPD, or if you've got a CESR, a CESR support system within your board, to try and see how you can get that experience. It might be through, a period where you've gone out, of your main job for maybe a couple of weeks or a couple of months to gain that experience, or there may be opportunities that might come along the way. So for example, in NHS Grampian, we had a huge difficulty in recruiting our registrars into the on-call rota, and we were having lots of gaps. And actually, a lot of our SAS doctors who were interested in the CESR process, they opted to come back into the rota so that they're able to get that experience of doing on-call work and get the experience for emergency psychiatry type of evidence for their portfolio. So things like that will normally come your way in your day-to-day clinical practice. It is about, first of all, knowing what you need, because once you know that, you can then pick those things out and actually use them as a positive experience towards your portfolio. And once you've done that, then I think you can develop a timeline. You can kind of have a sense of how long would you need to get and gather all your evidence together, so that you've got a sense of when you will be ready to submit your portfolio. I think it's key to try and find opportunities in the everyday. And I certainly believe, and I know most jobs within Scotland are very similar in terms of the way they're structured. I think most doctors, if they're able to understand the curricula really well and work along their job plan, would be able to get most of the stuff that they need. I'm sure at least 70 to 80% of the work you can get that from your day-to-day. You don't need to go out of your regular jobs for the bulk of the evidence that's needed, because as Nandini said, it's more the quality that we're looking for rather than the quantity as such. For the rest that's left, that might be those gaps where you don't have inpatient experience, or you don't have experience in developmental psychiatry, and you might need to go out a little bit to kind of get that evidence. But most of it can be done in your day-to-day practice. As long as you know what you need to do and the level that you need to demonstrate, then you can use those everyday opportunities to actually structure your daily work in that way. So, writing emails, doing communication letters, doing your tribunals, that's bread and butter for all of us in our regular jobs. And once you know what you're doing, you can actually use that towards your evidence in CESR. I've done a few CESR evaluations in my time, and I will say that, the quality of the letters that we feel meet the criteria for what is, satisfactory criteria at a consultant level is not necessarily 5-10 pages of a communication letter to the GP. Is the quality again that we're looking for, and you could produce really good quality letters as long as you know how you're going to be able to do that. So for example, if you do like a paragraph style response to GPs, you might want to structure that in the way that you've got risk assessment that's highlighted as a separate paragraph. You might have your ICD-10 diagnoses as a separate paragraph. You might have discussions about medication or physical health. You might put in aspects of physical examination if you've done that. So there are many ways in which you can actually get all the evidence that you need. one of the tricks that I found very useful, and hopefully folk find here useful as well, is we're all on, hopefully on Outlook for, Microsoft Outlook 365 is what we use in NHS Grampian for our regular sort of email communication. So you can kind of create subfolders within your inbox and actually have subfolders for CESR. So you can just have one subfolder for CESR, or if you want to be more organized, you can have separate bits for the HLOs. And then as your work comes along, you can actually maybe move some of those emails, just throw them into that box, so that later maybe when you're doing your weekly review or your monthly review, you can actually have a look at that, anonymize that, and then put those those evidences into the right folders, as Nandini was describing. So there are ways in which you can kind of use your day-to-day information and use that for your portfolio. Again, smart utilization of appraisal and revalidation. We all need to do 365 appraisals. We need to do that for patient feedback, for feedback from colleagues, some of the documentation. So things like responding to complaints, engaging with adverse event reviews, all those kinds of things we're doing naturally, normally anyway. We're doing feedbacks when we're doing our SOAR, completion of our SOAR appraisals. So all of that information you can actually take and use that for your evidence as well. Also look for opportunities to do reflections. If you've, again, as part of that triangulation, if you've, say, for example, come across a clinical case where there's a certain issue that's discussed, and then you maybe attended a presentation on that similar process. So let's say, for example, adult support and protection, you've had some concerns or some discussions for a patient regarding that. Then there's been an adult support and protection meeting in which you've taken part and given your views on the patient's mental illness or capacity, etc. You've attended an ASP sort of training event, and then you do a reflection on whatever you've learned, both clinically as well as from training. So all of that can together bring a lot of dimension to the skills that you're bringing through your portfolio. I absolutely believe things that don't get scheduled don't get done. So it's really important that you prioritize your CESR and your career progression. And really the only way to do that is to get that clarity and to put that, I think, in your calendar, that there absolutely needs to be places where you've got clear times within your job plan, but also within your calendar where you're doing your reviews, where you're collecting your data, you're reviewing your data, you may be engaging with CESR related sort of events or trying to keep that momentum up for yourself as well. So that's really, really important. Talking a little bit about the organizational supports that are available. Again, some of them you may be aware of, and some of them not so much. So I'll talk a little bit about the various different ones that are available for us here in Scotland. The first one is your employer. So in Scotland, we've got the integrated joint boards who are our employer. So that is, a couple of years ago, we had the amalgamation of the NHS services with that of health and the social care partnership. So we've got a health and social care partnership that basically kind of pay for our jobs. So they would be our employers. And there are lots of things that they can do. Absolutely, I think it's important to develop your PDP and then discuss that with your line manager, because really they may be able to support you through with a job plan where there is dedicated time available for you towards the CESR. That's certainly something that we've been able to do in NHS Grampian for some of our CESR aspirants, where we've tried to get them dedicated time out with their their study leave or their day-to-day work, where they can just kind of focus and work on the CESR. And I think really key important piece of work that we're trying to very keenly do in NHS Grampian, but also across Scotland, is to try and develop some of the key roles that will help develop these pathways to become a mainstream pathway. So things like CESR mentors, CESR evaluators, as well as CESR peer group coordinators. I must say it tends to be quite patchy. It's really difficult sometimes to know if there are CESR evaluators that are available in various different specialities. I've been trying to work on this for many months, and I still am not completely clear whether we have CESR evaluators across Scotland in all specialities of psychiatry. But we're trying to get all of that together, and also really trying to advocate to our colleagues and from a management point of view to say that this can only work if you've got interest from the boards, from the government, as well as the supporting organizations to put in more resources and supports for CESR evaluation, because that is absolutely key. When you have more CESR evaluators, they exactly know what is required. They know the benchmark of the quality of evidence that's required. And it can't just be any other education supervisor who is primarily maybe linked with the CCT pathway, because that's very different and that's very secondary evidence led. And really what you need is somebody who is, trained and can work as CESR evaluator, so that they can then kind of impart that knowledge and that skill further to the CESR applicants from their local area. There is a national NHS Scotland CESR peer group that was set up as a part of the Scottish Deanery. Priti Dasgupta, who's also one of my colleagues on the CESR Equivalence Committee, and she's a CESR evaluator, has been really key with that CESR peer group and regularly kind of presents and supports doctors across. So if you don't have any local groups that haven't been set up yet, definitely this is something that you can link into. This is a very sort of national sort of group, and it's not just specific to psychiatry. They have different streams for different specialities, but they also run one for psychiatry. So if you're interested, you can get in touch with the email I've listed below, and Roseanne, who helps kind of support that piece of work as well. Prita's got some slides on the Scottish Deanery website as well, which describe her own experience of doing the CESR program. And I think we need more people like Prita to, be coming together and supporting our doctors in Scotland. What else can Scottish Deanery do? If folk are not aware, for doctors who are substantive SAS doctors, there's actually support systems within the structure of Scottish Deanery that can support you. The main one is the Ses Development Fund, which can pay for things like online courses, short time top-up training, and also secondments into maybe areas of expertise that you might need for your CESR portfolio. So they may be able to provide support for you for that. The key thing for that is to get in touch with your educational advisor. So every area has an educational advisor for SAS doctors who can help doctors understand how the development fund works, and tell you a little bit about how to apply for that. And it's key that you take into some support from your clinical directors, because there needs to be clarity in terms of what you're planning to do and how is that going to support your career progression. I've got the link to the Scottish Deanery website. It's got more information on that program, but certainly that's something that has been utilised very well across the board in Scotland. And if there's something that you're looking to do, that will be very useful to do that. I must once again highlight that if you're planning to do an online course, again, remember a lot of that might not be primary evidence, it would be secondary evidence, but still you could use that together with the primary evidence, or use it as a top-up for evidence if you want to do that. I've just got a slide for later reference if people want to know who are their educational advisors for SAS doctors, and they will be the link person for you if you're looking to apply for the development fund. I want to talk a little bit about the journey that we've had in NHS Grampian, right, from the start to where we are just now. So like I said, we started off thinking, right, okay, we've got lots of doctors within NHS Grampian who are quite keen to use the CESR pathway as a route to specialist registration. They're pretty much working in silos, doing their own thing and working at their own progress. Is there anything we can do from an organizational point of view that links everybody together to support them? So that's where we started. We just simply didn't need any investment or anything like that. We just got everybody together and started our monthly peer group, which is basically to support everybody to bring their journeys together, to learn from each other in terms of their journeys, the tips, whatever advice that they'd heard about. So again, in many ways, what that did is I think it helped build that momentum and that feeling that it's a group thing. We're all here together. We're all going to support each other moving forward with the CESR. What that's led to for us is that we've kind of morphed and developed that into something that's going to be more useful as an educational program as well. So we've planned to use that as a platform really for doctors to be able to do presentations, say, for example, on critical appraisal or certain areas that they want to maybe, sort of demonstrate skills in teaching or education. So we've used those opportunities or use that time really to support doctors in doing that. We've also looked at the job plans of our doctors who are planning to do the CESR, so very clearly tried to give them time within their job plan for them to be able to develop their CESR portfolio and support them through that process. And then from there, we developed a more structured CESR program to see whether we could have a bit more resources put in to make this a bit more structured training, so that there is a bit more sort of organizational support there, which can help the doctor's journey across in a way in which we can, collectively sort of monitor where things are going, whether the doctors have all the supports they need, where are the deficiencies with their portfolios, and what can be done to try and support them with that. And that led to the development of the CESR Fellowship in NHS Grampian. So this is the first CESR Fellowship in Scotland, and I must thank Neeraj and my other colleagues from the CESR Equivalence Committee who supported us in understanding how this could work for us. So we've started that as a 3-year fixed-term CESR Fellow fellowship posts, which is basically designed to provide that bespoke CESR-related experience. We've taken all the guidance that there is there from the document that was produced by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which again, I think, absolutely, it seems like the Royal College of Psychiatry is absolutely ahead of the other Royal Colleges in developing a system to support, organizations and areas that don't have that support network already. So there is a wonderful document that Nandini had mentioned as well, which basically describes really how you would start a CESR fellowship program. It very clearly describes what it's meant for, what kind of support systems need to be put into place before you start opening this up for, for people, because you don't want to set people up to fail or to not get the experience that they're expecting to get once they come into that fellowship. So we very much took, that guide to be our our main guide for developing and the structures that we need for our CESR fellowship. And in that process, we've developed a system where we hope to be able to take our CESR fellows through a process over the 3 years where they can get, very firm weekly clinical supervision. They can get educational supervision from experienced CESR evaluators who exactly will be able to review their, portfolios on a, 3-monthly, 6-monthly annual basis to basically see whether they are progressing on track, or the areas which need a bit more, of evidence or need some support, and that support is available for them. There will be 2 PA sessions for them, just like trainees get, to develop their specific areas of capabilities as per the new curricula. And then obviously they'll have their study leave allowance for that as well. There are lots of upcoming developments in relation to that. So that is something that has worked really well for NHS Grampian, and now we're trying to spread that word and try and make this something that can work both on a regional as well as a national basis for Scotland. So at the moment, I am sort of, speaking with a lot of people from the north of Scotland, which is an organisation that looks at the 5 local boards of the north of Scotland, some of which are quite remote and rural and have, kind of struggled to get recruitment for senior doctors. So we're using that as a way to see whether we can develop the CESR fellowship in a way in which that these doctors can provide support to those areas, but also get that good, healthy experience that they need in their journey through that process through the CESR fellowship. We're looking at the potential for developing a managed CESR network across Scotland, which would basically be a network that will help, various different boards, if they're developing their own CESR programs, to come together and somehow network and support each other in that process. Very vitally important, I think, for anyone thinking about developing a CESR fellowship program. The absolute key that we need is CESR evaluators to be able to do that. Because without having CESR evaluators, it's really not something that we can develop or promote, because you really don't have skilled trainers who would be able to evaluate and support the CESR fellows through that process. It's really important for us, I think, in Scotland, if we want to develop the CESR as a very viable route for us to have, investment and time put into increasing the number of CESR evaluators across the different specialities within psychiatry. Not necessarily each board having all the evaluators, but at least having a few across Scotland, so that the managed clinical network can then help support doctors from across a range of areas within Scotland through that managed network. So that is the idea that we're trying to see if we can get a bit of buy-in from the various different stakeholders and from a Scottish Deanery as well as from the Scottish Government. So that's very much a work in progress at the moment. And then I know Neeraj mentioned about the CESR conference as well, so I'm quite keen to hear, and hopefully we'll be advocating a lot of our managers and clinical directors to take part in that and actually understand that process, so they were able to further develop the network and further support our doctors in Scotland with this programme. Thank you very much for listening.